Well, we got to get into the Raiders because their season is here. 5 days from now they will start their season, and all guests are coming to you via the Fire Wings hotline. Try one of their delicious flavors of wings today. Fire Wings.
Just wing it.
Yeah. Scott Bair is back, and we love talking to Scott Bair, Raiders insider for NBC Sports Bay Area. Scott, how are you this morning?
Good morning. How's it all going? I'm ready to finally start a season. No more helmets, no more feet, just football.
Yeah. Scott, let me ask you just right off the bat. Jason and I were just talking about this in the last segment. We were grading Hard Knocks. I'm of the opinion that I give Hard Knocks an A, and I give the NFL an F, and I give the Raiders a C. I feel like Hard Knocks could only do what they were given, and this was a little bit weird without being able to see cuts and just the way cut downs happened to begin with, which is one of the central storylines. Do you disagree? Do you give more of the blame to Hard Knocks? How did you think the season went?
I think the system was finally exposed for the flaws that it has. In that, at this point, after so many years, no team wants to let all these cameras in, and no team wants to become a GIF, I don't know how the kids say it, or one of those little snippety things. Yeah. They don't want that. And really what it comes down to is when you force a team to expose itself to the rest of the country, possibly to be a punchline, they normally just kind of say, all right, let's grin and bear and move on. The other option, the only weapon at their disposal is, okay, you forced us to do this. We can't do anything about being on this show, but what we can do is that since you idiots gave us essentially veto power on the final cut, we're going to exercise it big time. And that's exactly what they did, is that their chief of digital and general manager Mike Mayock saw most of the footage that NFL Film/HBO wanted to use. They said, yeah, no. And then on a lot of the good stuff that we normally see, they said, They wouldn't let him in meeting rooms for the quarterbacks. They wouldn't let him in for cuts, obviously, which it can be a sick fascination for me. If I had a camera on me, I've never gotten fired, but if I did, I may not want it there. But nonetheless, that's the reason why, and I think they need to make changes to the system, either incentivize a volunteer or find a way to get a team that isn't dragged onto this show against its will.
Yeah, and I think, I can't remember his name, I apologize, Scott. Week 1 of Hard Knocks, that is the only cut we saw in what I would say would be equivalent to real time. The hard part about this, we knew that, Marshall had been cut and Doss had been cut. So last night's episode, though we didn't get to actually see the cuts, it didn't have the same kind of impact maybe than we would have maybe in past years.
Yeah, we saw exit interviews. And Ronald Ollie was the one person who got cut kind of on camera-ish, and even then they didn't show, I guess the axe falling, so to speak. And even when we saw Jason Kabinda talk to Paul Gunther, that wasn't the cut. That was like the explanation, of what had happened. But, I just really think that, ultimately the Raiders kind of wanted to keep their business private. And let's take a look at this, right? The guys that were featured prominently, Jonathan Abram had some funny one-liners, you know what I mean? And we know he likes to talk trash, and he has personality plus children. But think about it. They featured Brandon Marshall, Keelan Doss, Luke Wilson, Nathan Peterman, right? Those were like the big overarching storylines that we kind of followed through most of the episodes, and really that's actually minus Brandon Marshall. But of those guys, right, any of them make the team?
No.
Nope. So, what did you learn from the show that is applicable to the 2019 Raiders 53-man roster, other than, man, John Gruden is television gold and a great quote, and nobody knows where Danny Woodhead went to school. Outside of that, you don't know anything, right? Well, I mean, Antonio Brown, you know that his feet hurt and that he has a new helmet and that he works really hard. And I thought the most telling quote, and I'll get off my soapbox here, but the most telling quote of the entire series was in like episode 2 or 3, and the only time that they did kind of like a side, testimonial interviews was with Antonio Brown, and he was getting ready to work out, and he actually said to the camera, or the producers behind the camera, and I'm paraphrasing now, he said, I'm so sick and tired of talking about my feet. I'm so sick and tired of, talking about everybody criticizing me. Why can't we just focus on the fact that I work hard, right? And then they went into a work hard montage. So they did exactly what he wanted. And ultimately, that's what that was, is the Raiders said, we don't want to include that. We don't want to include that. Here's what we do want to include, and it's your only option. So run it. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And that's kind of where we were, and I think that's why ultimately it was a real ho-hum season.
Scott Bair, Raiders Insider, NBC Sports, Bay Area. Scott, I want you to talk with us about the 3 quarterbacks, and I understand Peterman was hurt, so for a second it looked like they were keeping 4, and then that all came out. I don't know whether it's Keelan Doss, I don't know if it's Marshall or somebody else, but Jason and I both kind of agree. Why not just keep 2? Because if Derek Carr goes down, your season's screwed anyways. And then if Derek Carr and your backup go down, you're really screwed. They lack depth at certain other positions. Why keep 3 quarterbacks? Why not save that spot and use it for another place you might need more depth? What was the thinking behind that?
I find little logic in it because I agree with everything that you just said.
Okay.
But ultimately, if I were to step into the mind of the decision maker, not me, John Gruden's got an extra comma on his paycheck, and I think what it boils down to is 2 things. One, his belief in developing quarterbacks into assets or having that type of old school security. Teams always used to have 3 quarterbacks. And I think that when you lose one and then you're down to 1 in a game situation, even though they don't have the emergency quarterback anymore, so I'm kind of taking my own words back. But, I mean, he likes to have that pipeline and of guys that are in his system. And to John Gruden's defense, his system is super duper complicated when it comes to the verbiage, when it comes to what to do out of it. And they gave Nathan Peterman a package of stuff to master during the preseason that looked a lot different than what Derek Carr and Mike Glennon were doing, and I think that's ultimately the objective. So if you lose your quarterback in week 2, right, and yeah, your season is screwed, but at least you have a pecking order and guys that speak your language in the middle of the season when you should be game planning and not trying to teach a new quarterback. And that's ultimately what's happening here with Kaiser. I never once thought that they preferred Kaiser over Peterman. I never once thought that Peterman was getting a bunch of John Gruden lip service over the actual belief that he did make progress. I was there for every practice. There were a lot of times that Nate Peterman kid looked pretty freaking good, right? And the problem is that most don't have the benefit and pleasure of getting paid to watch football practices, right? And they just remember 5 picks in 1 half versus the Chargers and the absolute confidence implosion on national television that was Nathan Peterman's early NFL experience. So they did want to keep him. I think you guys have a great argument for why on earth you would ever keep 3. I would give you debate points every single time, but John Gruden just doesn't see it that way.
So, Scott, being that you were at every practice, I'm sure you were surprised by a cut or 2. Which one, when they've made the decision to get to the 53, surprised you the most?
I mean, they actually kind of alluded to it in the Hard Knocks episode. I forget who said it. One of the other defenders. And he was like, Brandon Marshall's been running with the 1s the entire time. Like he went from starter to cut instantly. And I know he's playing in the 3rd preseason game, and that's a red flag and things like that. But I was surprised in that regard. And there's your 3rd quarterback right there, right? Your 3rd quarterback is your 6th linebacker. You know, it's not a tit-for-tat sort of a situation, and that's a position of strength that they could have used and maybe kept him, and if they did think he was on the upswing, that ultimately he could have, come back around or been a steady contributor. But watching every practice, I watched Brandon Marshall with the 1s a lot. And then, when you're not tackling to the ground and things, and I don't have his previous career, I didn't watch a bunch of Brandon Marshall tape, sorry guys, from his Denver days to compare it to but I thought that they were going to keep him around. Maybe not the whole season, but they were going to give him a legitimate shot to have 3 veteran linebackers. So that was a surprise to me.
You know, one thing we didn't see a lot of, Scott, was people outside of Antonio Brown and Derek Carr on offense. Going into the season, Derek Carr's got Josh Jacobs, who they're hoping, I imagine, to be the bell cow in the backfield. But you have Terrell Williams, Hunter Renfrow, Antonio Brown, Darren Waller, who was a great story during Hard Knocks. How would you compare the skill positions on offense Derek Carr has to work with other years in his career? Is this easily the best group of skill players he's had to play with?
I wish I could say that like I texted you to ask me that question, but I literally just wrote that. Season preview elements, cha-ching, on NBC Sports Theory, great minds and all that stuff.
Right.
And I think what it comes down to is I compared that group to the 2016 group when they were 12-4 and the offense was humming. This group is night and day better. I think it's better at virtually every position. If you were to go Cooper versus Brown and Crabtree versus Williams, and Seth Roberts versus, anybody, but Seth Roberts versus Hunter Renfrow, and they have a lot more depth, and I think even Josh Jacobs, right, because we've seen 4 real carries where when he can get taken to the ground, a lot more in practice, but I do think that he is a legitimate NFL instant impact player. So all those things are better. Their line in 2016 was awesome. It is not there. It may be very good, but we don't know yet, right? I can tell you all that you want about, Colton Miller looks like a bunch of cinder blocks stuck together this year, right? And he has made strides, and he's not going to yell, he's not going to tear your eyeballs out, but he's just going to beat you every single play and, give you like a little smirk. I think that's what's going to happen, but I don't really know, right? And that line plays a big role in what the skill players are able to do.
Scott Bair, our Raiders insider, joining us here on The Drive here on Sports 1140 KHTK. Scott, kind of relating this back to Hard Knocks, but also the season coming up, another guy I was certain we'd see a lot of on Hard Knocks was Vontaze Burfict.
Yeah.
We just didn't. One, I don't know if that was by design, and number two, how has he looked as part of this Raiders defense?
It was by design. Josh Jacobs was the only guy who was really explicit about it, in the fact that he said, I've been ditching the dodging the cameras the entire time. And they wanted him really bad. His backstory is absolutely incredible. There were times where him and his father and his siblings were living in roach motels and the back of an SUV, and this kid manages to find a way to make it to the University of Alabama and a first-round draft pick and all these types of things. It's one of those good old-fashioned All-American stories that'll kind of give you the feels, right? And he avoided the cameras. He didn't want to tell that story anymore after all the pre-draft coverage of it. Vontaze Burfict took a very similar tact. I think with him and Richie Incognito, right, that there isn't a lot to be gained. I thought that Richie came off well and showed, talked about his mental health and his counseling and things like that. But, he gets in one joint practice fight, right, and everybody's like, oh, same old guy. And as Vontaze talks about, being aggressive, or they ask about Antonio Brown, maybe, he goes right back to it, and his reputation goes right to the forefront. And that's something that I think he's trying to ditch over the course of this off-season and preseason. And I'm not saying he's the type of guy to ever take his foot off the throttle pedal. You get the analogy. Anyway, it's early. But Vontaze, I think, has looked better. We talk a lot, and the recurring narrative is about him knowing Paul Guenther's defense and him being a good leader of a young defense, and all those things are true, right? Those things only really matter if you're good on the field. If you're just a rah-rah guy, or if you can't stay on the field for 3 days, your impact as a football professor emeritus or even a resident advisor is lessened. So he needs to show up and be on the field and be an efficient tackler and be functional in coverage, and he's going to get that opportunity because he will be a three-down player, especially now with Brandon Marshall out. There's Markel Lee as your backup Mike and backup Sam, really. So ultimately, I think he's looked good. I think he's going to surprise some people. And again, I think a better theme of training camp in the preseason has been about these types of guys looking for a real shot at redemption, right? Instead, we got Antonio Brown's feet and Antonio Brown's helmet and Antonio Brown's work ethic kind of beaten into our brains for 6 straight weeks.
Scott Bair, NBC Sports California. I want to stick with the defense. I look at this depth chart in no particular order, and I see the rookie Clelin Ferrell out of Clemson, Arden Key, who's still so young at 23, Vontaze Burfict, Garyon Conley, Carl Joseph, and Jonathan Abram. LaMarcus Joyner. I look at this depth chart, and I see names that jump out either as proven products who've had success in the past or young guys with a lot of potential. Where do you see this defense right now, and how high do you think their ceiling is this year?
Good question.
Thank you.
I would say no, that's your allotment for the month.
That's it.
So I see the secondary as a legitimate, regardless of the side of the ball, team strength. I think that they're deep. Trayvon Mullen, maybe not right away, but in time is going to be a baller. The guy gets it. And LaMarcus Joyner, there's going to be a lot of times that they're a nickel or kind of, it sort of looks like a 3 safety. I think New Mexico calls it like a Lobo. They just kind of have like a roving safety who can do a bunch of stuff, and LaMarcus Joyner can do all those types of things. Maybe the best free agent signing that they had. And ultimately, I think that that's going to be good. I think the defensive front is going to be better, but the problem with the defensive front being better is you might be like Raiders fans might be like, oh, cool. Talk about secondary being good and the defensive line being better. Defensive line is better compared to 13 sacks last year, which ranked 32nd and was 17 worse than the 31st team. Okay? So let's just say that they're better, right? That term applies. Let's say you get to 40, right? That's like a 75% increase. Say that you get to 40 sacks, and that is a middle-of-the-road functional defensive front. That's not second coming of Miller and Chubb or Ingram and Bosa. By the way, all those guys are in the AFC West.
Right.
That they're not there. So better still doesn't mean good, and they talk about and I think that the defensive front, for as much as we've seen quick fix, free agent signings, expensive imports on offense, the defensive line has been committed to a through-the-draft multi-year rebuild, and we're only halfway through it. It's going to take another off-season's acquisitions for that part to be scary. So their ceiling is, in my opinion, how they can do with their run defense. I think their run defense is going to be better. I think their ceiling should be 17. How about that? And if they can hover around 17 in scoring defense and be right around 20, they can win some freaking football games because the Raiders can score. It's when you start getting into the we can't stop anybody and the only way that you're going to win is 42-38. That's when the season, even with a good offense, really just ends up going pear-shaped.
What do you think about the opener? I mean, 5 days away from the Monday night game? The only team that in the AFC West, besides the Raiders, that didn't make the postseason last year was Denver. They changed coaches. Fangio is a great defensive mind. You mentioned Miller and Chubb earlier. It could be one of those lower scoring games, but what do you think about Monday night's game, the opener against Denver?
I have zero confidence in Joe Flacco. Zero. I do not think he is a good quarterback, anymore. And I think that offense can be picked apart a little bit, and it may be an opportunity for Paul Gunther to pull some rabbits out of his hat. He has been more creative as a blitzer. You're going to see LaMarcus Joyner coming forward, and I say all that is that Joe Flacco is I think a guy that you can get to and impact, and I think all those things are positive. We talked about Colton Miller, right? They paid a mint to get Trent Brown in the building, and to lose all their food by the foots really quickly. And I think that those guys are going to be tested immediately. And if they can get a C+, I think the Raiders win this one, and everybody's, in terms of Raiders fans, are pretty thrilled when it comes to our conversation next week. I think that's a very winnable game. Must win is a stupid thing to say, even unless it's week 17, but you got to get off on the right foot, because after that you go Chiefs, and then you start the essentially 6-game road trip: Minnesota, Indy, to London against Chicago, back home for a breather, back on the road against Houston, and then Green Bay. Right? You got to win the first one now, because if you start in the whole 0-1, and then you could easily start 0-2, and then you're like, oh my gosh, is this a 2018 redo? And everybody's pissed.
Yeah. Well, Scott, thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to talking to you each and every week.
It's fun, guys. Appreciate it.
The Drive.